Step back in time and rediscover the theme park foods that delighted guests long before Epic Universe. These forgotten bites once defined amusement park dining, nostalgic, quirky, and oh so delicious. Before turkey legs took over, fried chicken served in paper-lined baskets was a beloved staple of vintage theme parks. Think crispy drumsticks, golden thighs, and flaky biscuits on the side, all enjoyed at wooden picnic tables with a plastic fork and a root beer float nearby. Parks like Knott's Berry Farm and early Six Flags locations made fried chicken dinners part of the experience, not just a meal. It mattered because it felt like Sunday dinner, portable, hearty, and meant for sharing. Families sat together, wiped greasy fingers on paper napkins, and watched the log flume riders scream by. Over time, faster foods replaced sit-down options. Fried chicken took too long to serve, too much cleanup, and lost out to burgers and pizza slices. But one bite of real, bone-in fried chicken could take you right back to a simpler park era, where rides were thrilling, the food was homemade, and everyone ate together. It was messy, sure, but totally magical. Before foot-long hot dogs and pretzel-wrapped sausages ruled the snack carts, nothing beat a classic corn dog straight from the fryer, wrapped in wax paper and handed over by a smiling teen in a paper cap. These deep-fried delights were everywhere in the 60s and 70s. Especially in family-owned amusement parks and county fair-style attractions. The cornmeal batter was golden, slightly sweet, and crunchy at the edges. You'd dunk it in yellow mustard and walk around like you owned the Midway. It mattered because it was fun food. No utensils, no plate, just pure nostalgic joy. Eventually, they lost ground to more Instagrammable treats, like rainbow churros and gourmet hand foods. But vintage corn dogs had flavor, tradition, and an unbeatable sense of play. Today you might still find them, but they're rarely as fresh or nostalgic. Want to taste theme park history? Track down a wax paper corn dog, take a bite, and time travel back to the Tilt-A-Whirl days. Long before taco bowls or churro sundaes, vintage amusement parks served up tacos in humble paper boats. Hard shells stuffed with seasoned beef, shredded lettuce, bright yellow cheese, and packets of hot sauce on the side. They weren't authentic, but they were delicious in a nostalgic school lunch kind of way. The shell always cracked halfway through, and the lettuce was always slightly wilted, but no one cared. Theme parks in the 70s and 80s loved offering these as an alternative to the usual burger and fries combo. Why did they matter? Because they felt slightly exotic at the time, a nod to international flair in a world of corn dogs and cotton candy. Eventually, as food courts modernized and menus expanded, these kitschy tacos vanished, replaced by street taco stands and taco salad bowls. But those paper boats, they held memories as tightly as they held shredded cheddar. Coming up next, frozen treats, old school snacks, and sugary staples that made waiting in line totally worth it. Long before Dole Whip ruled the frozen dessert world, there was Banana Whip, a soft serve-style treat that tasted like frozen banana cream pie. Served in swirled cones or paper cups, it was sweet, creamy, and just tropical enough to feel vacation-worthy. Theme parks in Florida and California, especially those with jungle or safari themes, made Banana Whip a standout offering during the 1970s and early 80s. Why did it matter? Because it felt new and refreshing in a sea of chocolate and vanilla. Kids loved the taste. Parents loved that it wasn't quite as messy as melting ice cream. But as more brand partnerships took over park menus, like Dole at Disney and Coca-Cola treats elsewhere, Banana Whip quietly disappeared. You might still catch a version of it at a state fair or roadside attraction, but it's rare. If you remember it, you know it was something special. A single bite transported you to a place of palm trees, parrots, and plastic souvenir cups. Remember those massive rainbow lollipops you could barely fit in your mouth? Spun into perfect spirals and wrapped in crinkly cellophane, jumbo lollipops were the ultimate treat for later you got right before heading home. They were sold near the exits, at the candy counters, and in every souvenir shop. Bright, bold, and nearly impossible to finish in one day. Kids clutched them proudly as proof they'd conquered the park, while parents grumbled about sticky faces and sugar highs in the car ride home. Why did they matter? Because they were tradition. Every park visit ended with one. But over time, they became less popular, replaced by chocolate-covered everything, novelty popcorns, and Instagram-friendly desserts. Still, jumbo lollipops live on in memory and in old photo albums, where kids stand in front of Ferris wheels holding them like trophies. Did you ever get one of those massive swirl lollipops as a souvenir? Tell us what treat meant day complete at your favorite childhood park. Before prepackaged treats filled the freezer cases, hand-scooped ice cream sandwiches were a vintage theme park gem. You'd pick your cookie, usually chocolate chip or oatmeal, and your ice cream flavor, then watch as a staffer scooped, smashed, and wrapped your creation in wax paper. Served fresh and often melting faster than you could eat it, these sandwiches were messy, massive, and totally magical. They mattered because they were made just for you, customized and full of charm. No identical factory squares here. Some parks even offered sprinkles or chocolate chip coatings pressed into the sides. Over time, they were replaced by novelty bars and mass-produced sandwiches for speed and efficiency. But these handmade originals were worth the wait. If you've ever held one with both hands while trying to keep your shirt clean, you know the joy. It wasn't just dessert. It was part performance, part indulgence. Up next, we bite into salty, savory classics and old-school eats that fueled entire days of roller coasters and sunburns. Long before pretzels were stuffed with cheese or turned into dessert hybrids, theme parks served simple, salted soft pretzels, big, chewy, and usually slightly overbaked on the edges. They came from metal warming cabinets, stacked on rotating racks behind concession counters. What made them special? The tiny mustard packets taped to the paper wrapper. Tearing one open and squeezing it across that doughy twist was part of the experience. They mattered because they were reliable, satisfying, and easy to eat with one hand while waiting in line. You'd nibble the outer edge, save the salty middle for last, and maybe trade bites with your little brother. Eventually, gourmet pretzels, pretzel buns, and pretzel bites stole the spotlight. But those classic salted twists? They had soul. Slightly dry? Sure, but always dependable. They were the fuel that powered long park days before the food courts and franchises moved in. Sometimes, the best bites come with a side of simplicity and just a little mustard. Before $7 bottled sodas and refillable Coke Freestyle machines, one of the best treats in a vintage theme park was a frosty root beer served in a plastic souvenir mug. These mugs were themed. Some looked like barrels, others like mini steins or cartoon characters, and they were refillable for the day. Vendors filled them with fizzy, icy-cold root beer, sometimes straight from tap-style fountains or even kegs at Western-themed areas. Why did it matter? Because it was more than a drink. It was a collectible. You held onto that mug all day, refilled it after rides, and took it home as a keepsake. Eventually, these were replaced by more generic souvenir cups and digital soda systems. But the charm of walking through a park with a sloshing root beer in a faux wooden mug? Timeless. Sticky, nostalgic, and full of fizz, this drink made summer days feel cooler and park trips more personal, one sweet, syrupy sip at a time. Foot-long chili dogs were the dare-you-to-finish-it kings of vintage park menus. Served on trays wrapped in foil, these massive franks were buried under chunky chili, shredded cheese, and sometimes diced onions or jalapenos. You'd need at least 3 napkins, and usually an open picnic table, to survive the first bite. They mattered because they turned a regular hot dog into an event. Parks in the 60s through 80s used them to lure in hungry guests who wanted more than a snack, but less than a sit-down meal. You didn't walk around with one of these. You sat down, hunched forward, and hoped your shirt survived. Eventually, the messiness and size made them less practical as menus streamlined and foot traffic increased. But for those who remember, these chili dogs were legendary. One look at that overloaded tray, and you knew you were about to make a delicious mistake. If you ever conquered one, you earned your spot in the Theme Park Hall of Fame. Fried dough was the sweet scent that led you by the nose through the boardwalks and midway lanes of vintage amusement parks. Flattened dough rounds were fried on the spot, dusted with mountains of powdered sugar, and handed to you on a paper plate hot enough to fog your sunglasses. The result? Crispy edges, chewy centers, and sugar in every crevice. Some parks called it elephant ears. Others offered cinnamon sugar as an option. But the powdered classic was always the star. It mattered because it wasn't just a treat, it was an experience. You tore off pieces, burned your fingers, and left a white sugar trail across your shorts. Eventually, funnel cakes and churros took over the fried dessert space, but fried dough was the original. It wasn't perfectly shaped or camera ready. It was personal, messy, and unforgettable. Which of these theme park classics do you miss most? Pretzels, chili dogs, fried dough, or souvenir root beer mugs? Share your pick in the comments below. Once a carnival favorite, fried bologna sandwiches made their way into many regional theme parks during the 60s and 70s. They were made simply: thick-cut bologna fried until the edges curled, slapped between slices of white bread or a soft bun, and topped with yellow mustard or a slice of American cheese. Sometimes onions or pickles made it in. But this wasn't gourmet. It was comfort food, served from small griddles behind food counters or roadside-style diners within the park. They offered a quick, salty bite that stuck with you all afternoon. Why did they matter? Because they were real food, not processed snacks or sugary treats, but something familiar and filling. Eventually, the bologna sandwich was replaced by more crowd-pleasing fare, like burgers and hot dogs. But for those who grew up with them, fried bologna brings back the sound of sizzling grills, the smell of charred lunch meat, and the thrill of taking a bite just before hopping back in line for the tilt-a-whirl. Before slushies and frozen drink stations, there were snow cones, vibrant mounds of crushed ice packed into paper cones and soaked with sticky, electric-colored syrups. Cherry red, blue raspberry, neon green lime. Each flavor was pure sugary delight on a hot day. These weren't fancy shaved ice desserts with exotic toppings. They were simple, sweet, and absolutely refreshing. You'd hold the cone with both hands as the syrup dripped down your arms and stained your lips bright blue. Theme parks had entire carts dedicated to snow cones, often operated by teens who filled the cups from crank-operated ice shavers and hand-pumped syrup dispensers. Why did they matter? Because they cooled you down and made you smile at the same time. Over time, they were replaced by more high-tech frozen drinks, slush machines, and smoothie bars. But that paper cone snow cone? It was summertime joy, wrapped in a napkin, shared with friends, and always melting faster than you could eat it. Coming up, sweet treats, popcorn classics, and retro novelties that gave every ride exit a reason to stop and snack. Before gourmet caramel corn and refillable popcorn tubs, vintage parks served popcorn in small souvenir buckets shaped like cartoon characters, circus drums, or ride mascots. The popcorn was freshly popped, slightly salty, and often tossed into butter-stained novelty containers that kids begged to keep. These buckets mattered because they turned a basic snack into a lasting memory. You'd munch while waiting in line or watching parades, then take the bucket home and use it to hold crayons, toys, or marbles. Parks like Disney, Kings Island, and Busch Gardens leaned into this trend heavily during the 70s and 80s, making each season's bucket a collectible. Eventually, mass-produced designs and refills became the norm, but the charm of the older styles, colorful, molded, and completely impractical, remains unmatched. The popcorn itself, not particularly special, but the container made it magic. If you ever had one of those old-school buckets rattling in your trunk on the drive home, you know just how sweet that buttery nostalgia really was. Frozen bananas on a stick, dipped in rich chocolate and sometimes rolled in chopped nuts or sprinkles, were the healthy-ish dessert of vintage theme parks. Served from snack carts and freezer cases, they were a cool, handheld treat that felt like a reward after a long day in the sun. Wrapped in foil or wax paper, they took effort to eat, but that made them last longer than a scoop of ice cream. Parents liked them because they felt a bit better than cotton candy, and kids loved the crunch of chocolate giving way to frozen banana. They mattered because they were different, less common, more novel, and always tied to that nostalgic treat-yourself park energy. Over time, they faded away as more decadent sweets took over, but the frozen banana still shows up occasionally at smaller or retro-themed parks. If you remember unwrapping one on a warm evening, you remember more than dessert? You remember that perfect park moment, sweet and simple. Cotton candy was the ultimate vintage theme park sugar rush. Pastel clouds of spun sugar, packaged in clear plastic bags that fogged up in the heat and stuck to your fingers before you even opened them. Unlike today's plastic tubs or fancy flavors, the old-school version came in blue and pink only, fluffy, sticky, and totally irresistible. It was often sold by vendors walking through the park or spun live in glass booths where kids watched it whirl around a paper cone like magic. Why did it matter? Because it was part performance, part treat. No ride queue or parade was complete without someone clinging to a bag of cotton candy. Eventually, health trends and modern packaging replaced the old-fashioned charm, but the taste of those airy bites never quite left us. It wasn't just a snack, it was a souvenir, a photo prop, and a sugar-fueled rite of passage. Did you go for popcorn, cotton candy, or those frozen chocolate bananas? Tell us what sweet treat you never left the park without. Before pickle-flavored popcorn or pickle pizza became quirky park trends, many amusement parks offered the original salty snack. Giant dill pickles on a stick, pulled straight from big jars or plastic tubs, these cold, briny treats were speared onto wooden skewers and sold from snack counters, often alongside bottled sodas and caramel apples. They were crisp, juicy, and incredibly refreshing on a hot day, not to mention budget-friendly. Kids clutched them like lollipops, biting into their vinegary crunch between rides, while parents appreciated their low-mess simplicity. Why did they matter? Because they were fun, different, and added that carnival flair without being deep-fried or sugary. Over time, they were replaced by trendier, cooler snacks, but pickles on a stick still make appearances at some retro-themed parks and fairs. If you ever walked through a park with one in hand, lips puckered and eyes watering, it was oddly satisfying, entirely memorable, and exactly the kind of weird snack that made vintage theme parks so magical. Sticky, shiny, and almost too pretty to eat, caramel apples were a classic treat found in nearly every theme park for decades. Fresh apples were dipped in warm, gooey caramel, and sometimes rolled in peanuts, candy pieces, or sprinkles before being set on a wax sheet to cool. Once hardened, they were wrapped in clear cellophane and tied with a ribbon, or handed directly to you on a wooden stick. They mattered because they combined sweetness with just enough crunch to feel like real food. You felt like a champion if you actually finished one before it got too messy or sticky. Caramel apples were often sold near souvenir shops or bakery counters, and biting into one was part of the end-of-day tradition. Eventually, they gave way to more manageable desserts like caramel apple slices or dip cups, but nothing compares to the full-on experience of gnawing around a caramel-covered Granny Smith. It was a challenge, a memory, and a sticky smile all in one. Long before sugar-free gum and freeze-dried Skittles, kids flocked to the candy counters in vintage theme parks for one oddball favorite: candy cigarettes. Made of chalky sweet sticks with red tips to mimic a lit end, these tiny novelties were packed in mini cardboard boxes that looked suspiciously like the real thing. Sold as a gag, a treat, and a rite of passage, they were both controversial and wildly popular. Why did they matter? Because they felt grown-up, rebellious, and a little funny, especially when kids strutted around pretending to smoke them while waiting in line for the bumper cars. Over time, growing concerns about marketing tobacco to children led to their disappearance from shelves, but for those who remember, they were harmless fun with a burst of nostalgia. The flavor? Like sweet tarts without the tang. The memory? Unmistakable. Coming up, wacky novelties, retro drinks, and desserts that doubled as souvenirs, and sometimes even toys. If you visited a theme park in the 70s or 80s, chances are you had a cup of that mysterious orange drink. Not quite soda, not quite juice, but definitely sweet and cold. Served in waxy paper cups or branded souvenir mugs, this bright orange concoction tasted like watered-down tang with a splash of syrup. It was often part of kids' meals or sold at stands near kiddie rides and shaded rest stops. Why did it matter? Because it was affordable, everywhere, and instantly refreshing. It wasn't fancy or fizzy, but it paired perfectly with popcorn, pretzels, or a hot day. You didn't question what was in it. You just knew it meant you were having fun. As beverage offerings expanded to include slushies, bottled teas, and energy drinks, the humble orange drink faded out. But ask anyone who grew up with it, and they'll tell you, one sip could transport you straight back to the days of sunburned cheeks and ticket stubs. Before character-shaped sippers and collectible popcorn buckets, one of the most charming park souvenirs was a scoop of vanilla or strawberry ice cream served in a tiny plastic hat. Whether it was a cowboy hat from a Western-themed park or a hard hat from a construction ride, these whimsical containers were part dessert dish, part souvenir. Kids licked around the edges, trying not to spill, while parents tucked the hats into bags to take home. Why did it matter? Because it made the food part of the fantasy. Every spoonful felt like it came from a story, not a snack cart. Eventually, ice cream cones and pre-packaged cups took over, and the novelty hats became harder to find. But for those who remember, that little plastic hat lived on in toy chests, dress-up drawers, and family photos. Did you ever keep one of those plastic hat dishes or sip orange drink until your tongue turned neon? Tell us your most unforgettable vintage park snack in the comments. Long before wood-fired Neapolitan pies and mobile app ordering, pizza in theme parks was a simple affair. Greasy, triangular slices served in red plastic baskets lined with thin sheets of wax paper. The crust was soft and chewy, the cheese stretchy, and the pepperoni glistening with oil. The slices were never perfect, but that was part of the charm. You'd grab a tray, find a shady table, and juggle your slice while trying not to drop molten cheese on your lap. These pizzas mattered because they were fast, familiar, and filling. Ideal fuel for the next round of bumper cars or roller coasters. You didn't analyze the crust or the sauce. You just ate, smiled, and moved on. Over time, pizza got more polished, with themed restaurants and artisan toppings. But that old-school floppy slice in a red basket? It tasted like pure childhood. Still hungry? Up next, retro drinks, classic mall-style combos, and the chewy novelty that stuck around, literally. Bright purple, brain-freezing, and impossible to resist on a summer day, grape slushes were a go-to park drink for generations. Served in clear plastic dome-lidded cups with a spoon straw poking through, this icy treat had a syrupy sweetness that lingered on your tongue long after the last slurp. It wasn't a smoothie or a soda. It was its own thing. Theme parks sold them at kiosks near water rides or pool areas, sometimes alongside cherry or blue raspberry varieties. But grape always stood out for its artificial deliciousness. Why did it matter? Because it cooled you down and made your tongue look like you'd swallowed a crayon. Kids loved it. Adults caved in. Over time, slushes got fancier. Think frozen lemonades or carbonated ICEEs. But the grape slush? That was childhood in a cup. Sticky hands, purple mustaches, and smiles all around. You could almost hear the hum of the nearby carousel as you sipped, brain freeze and all. These weren't gourmet nachos with guac and roasted corn. These were classic theme park nachos. Thin, salty tortilla chips in a plastic tray, drenched in bright orange cheese sauce, pumped from a chrome machine. Maybe a few pickled jalapenos were tossed on top if you were feeling bold. Served at snack stands and food courts, they were easy to carry, fun to share, and dangerously addictive. Why did they matter? Because that cheese was liquid gold to a kid in the 80s or 90s. You didn't ask what it was made of, you just dipped until the tray was empty. These nachos filled the gap between lunch and dinner, and sometimes doubled as a whole meal. Over time, gourmet nachos and loaded tot options stole the spotlight, but nothing beats the simplicity of chips and pump cheese. One bite brings back paper napkins stuck to your fingers and the sound of distant ride screams. Crunchy, cheesy, and unforgettable. Theme park cheeseburgers weren't fancy, but they were reliable. Wrapped in shiny foil to keep them warm, these burgers featured a squishy bun, a thin beef patty, a slice of American cheese, and maybe a squirt of ketchup or mustard. Pickles were optional. You grabbed one from the counter, found a table with a view, and tore into it like it was gourmet. Why did it matter? Because it was the same every time, no matter what park, no matter what state. These foil-wrapped burgers were affordable, portable, and hit the spot after a morning of spinning rides and arcade games. Eventually, theme parks leaned into branded restaurants and customizable menus, and the humble foil burger became a rarity. But if you ever sat on a bench with one in hand, wrapper crinkling in your lap and the bun slightly squished, you remember. It was quick, comforting, and utterly nostalgic. One bite, and suddenly the music from the carousel sounds a little sweeter. With its sky blue swirl and candy pieces hidden inside, bubblegum ice cream was a retro theme park favorite that felt as whimsical as the rides themselves. The flavor was unmistakable, sugary, synthetic, and absolutely delightful. Kids flocked to ice cream counters for a scoop or two, in cones or little paper cups, and parents braced themselves for the inevitable sugar buzz. Tiny gumballs or chewy bits gave each bite an unexpected surprise. Why did it matter? Because it was a treat you couldn't get just anywhere, often reserved for park trips and summer vacations. It was colorful, fun, and perfectly chaotic, just like the park day itself. Eventually, bubblegum ice cream faded from menus, replaced by cookie dough and salted caramel trends. But the memory of that blue scoop lives on in sticky fingers and bright smiles. Which treat brought back a flood of memories? Bubblegum ice cream, foil-wrapped burgers, grape slush, or classic nachos? Drop your pick in the comments below. If your vintage theme park had a candy shop, and most did, then chances are it had a glass case filled with thick blocks of fudge, chocolate, peanut butter, rocky road, maple walnut. The options stretched like a sugary dream. The squares were sliced to order and wrapped in wax paper, often still warm from the pan. You'd carry them around in a small paper bag, nibbling as you walked past attractions and souvenir stands. Fudge mattered because it was handmade, indulgent, and came with a sense of occasion. It wasn't an impulse snack, it was a treat you picked out at the end of a long, magical day. Eventually, the rise of pre-packaged sweets and brand-name candy bars edged out the old-school fudge counters. But if you ever watched someone in a white apron pour glossy fudge onto a marble slab, you remember how special it felt. This wasn't just dessert, it was edible nostalgia, one dense, rich bite at a time. Before designer popcorn flavors and collectible buckets took over, hot buttered popcorn was scooped fresh into simple white paper bags, grease spots forming instantly on the sides. You'd buy it at pushcarts or counters near the entrance, the smell wafting through the park like a signal that something fun was happening. It mattered because it was universal. Everyone ate it, kids, teens, grandparents. It was snackable, portable, and somehow made every experience feel more festive. Popcorn was eaten during parades while people watching, or as a reward after a long line. Sometimes you'd spill a few kernels on the pavement and laugh as birds rushed in. Today's popcorn might come caramel-coated or in refillable tubs with LED lights, but back then, it came with simplicity and flavor. You held the warm bag in both hands, wiped your fingers on your shorts, and kept reaching in for more.
Now let's head into novelty territory. Wacky treats that made you laugh, point, and maybe question your life choices in the best way.
Unlike the smooth sheen of caramel apples, these were dipped in a glossy red candy shell so hard you could hear it crack. Sometimes they came plain, sometimes with multicolored sprinkles that stuck to the outside like edible glitter. Wrapped in cellophane and tied with ribbon, they were as pretty as they were difficult to eat. Why did they matter? Because they were pure eye candy, literally. You spotted them first in the display case and talked yourself into buying one, knowing full well it was going to stick to your teeth. Kids carried them around proudly, licking instead of biting, and most didn't finish them before the drive home. Eventually, softer, easier-to-eat options took over, but candy apples with sprinkles were an icon of old-school park treats. You didn't just eat them, you wore them. Sticky lips, red fingers, and a sugar high you'd ride all the way to the parking lot. Hot dogs were once the simplest, most satisfying meal you could grab between rides. Served in soft buns and nestled into flimsy cardboard boats, they came topped with mustard, ketchup, or a line of sweet pickle relish if you asked nicely. No gourmet frills, no brioche buns, just hot, salty, meaty comfort. They mattered because they were quick, cheap, and completely unpretentious. You could scarf one down in 5 minutes and still make your next Fast Pass window, or ride the log flume without fear of regret. The cardboard boats got soggy halfway through, and the napkins were never big enough. But none of that mattered. Over time, hot dogs were overshadowed by flashier items like loaded mac and cheese bowls or foot-long wraps, but their place in vintage park food culture is undeniable. One bite of that classic dog, and you're back in the sun, shoes untied, holding your tray in one hand and a cold drink in the other. A cone of soft serve dipped in a vat of magic shell chocolate coating was a small miracle of the theme park world. You watched, mesmerized, as the liquid chocolate hardened instantly on contact, forming a crackly shell around the creamy ice cream underneath. Sometimes it was vanilla, other times it was twist. Either way, it was an event. The first bite always shattered the shell, sending flakes everywhere and revealing the soft center inside. Why did it matter? Because it added just enough theater to make a simple cone feel like an upgraded experience. You stood in line to see it happen, not just to eat it. Eventually, more elaborate frozen desserts crowded the menu, but magic shell cones still live in memory, and in a few lucky parks that kept them. It wasn't fancy, but it was fun. Who remembers that first bite into a magic shell cone? Or battling a candy apple with sprinkles? Tell us which novelty snack you'd bring back if you could. These weren't your everyday pretzels. These were oversized, thick pretzel rods dipped in milk or white chocolate, sometimes coated in rainbow sprinkles, chopped nuts, or colored sugar. Sold from glass display cases or candy counters, they stood upright like edible trophies. Easy to grab, impossible to ignore. Why did they matter? Because they blended salty and sweet into a perfect on-the-go snack. You'd gnaw at the top like a candy cane, bite through the crunchy pretzel beneath, and eventually surrender when the chocolate melted in the sun. They were quirky, satisfying, and surprisingly filling, great for sharing or stashing away for later. Eventually, these got phased out by more elaborate desserts or health-conscious alternatives, but their place in park snack history is solid. The chocolate often cracked off in big chunks, and your fingers were sticky by the end, but it was worth it. One look at those glistening rods in a spinning rack, and you knew this was the real deal. Long before foodies praised it, chili in a bread bowl was the original Instagram-worthy park meal. Decades before social media existed, you'd get a ladle full of thick, spicy chili poured into a hollowed-out sourdough bowl, the rim slightly crisp and the center warm and soft. You'd eat the chili with a spoon, then slowly rip pieces from the bowl itself until nothing remained but crumbs. It mattered because it was hearty and satisfying, something you could sit down to enjoy between roller coasters and midway games. In colder weather parks or evening events, it warmed you up fast. Eventually, these were replaced by more portable items and fewer real meal options. But if you remember sitting under a shady pavilion, scraping chili off the bread edge with your spoon, you know how special it felt. It wasn't just food, it was an experience. A little heavy before the spinning rides? Sure, but delicious enough that you didn't care one bit. In the early 2000s, deep-fried Twinkies exploded onto the theme park scene, golden, greasy, and completely over the top. These carnival crossovers were dipped in batter, dropped in hot oil, and dusted with powdered sugar until they looked like something out of a sugar-fueled dream. You'd get one on a paper plate, bite into the crunchy exterior, and discover a warm, gooey cream center inside. Why did they matter? Because they embraced the excess of theme park eating, ridiculous, unnecessary, and completely irresistible. Kids dared each other to eat them. Adults pretended they were just trying a bite. Deep-fried Twinkies didn't last long on menus, phased out by healthier initiatives and changing vendor partnerships, but for a brief moment, they were iconic. If you ever had one, you remember the guilt and the grin. It was never about nutrition. It was about novelty. And for once, no one cared if their fingers were coated in oil and sugar. That was the whole point. Some family-friendly parks and themed resorts took it one step further, offering s'mores kits you could roast yourself at designated fire pits. You'd get a small package with graham crackers, marshmallows, and chocolate squares, sometimes with a wooden skewer included. You'd huddle around a crackling fire, toast your marshmallow just the way you liked it, and smash everything together in that perfect sticky sandwich. Why did it matter? Because it turned dessert into a memory. Families bonded, couples laughed, and kids got marshmallow in their hair. It wasn't something you just ordered. It was something you participated in. Eventually, s'mores kits disappeared from most parks, deemed too messy or too risky. But for those who remember, the joy of roasting your own marshmallow under the stars is impossible to replicate. It was the rare theme park treat that required patience and rewarded it with gooey, chocolate-dripping perfection. Did you ever roast s'mores in a park or resort setting? Or try a deep-fried Twinkie for the thrill of it? Share your wildest retro snack story below. No vintage theme park list would be complete without those odd, lovable cartoon ice cream bars. The ones with slightly melted gumball eyes and distorted faces. Sold from mobile carts or freezer bins, they featured characters like Bugs Bunny, Sonic, Ninja Turtles, or Mickey Mouse. The bars were usually a blend of fruity sherbet or vanilla ice cream, wrapped in colorful packaging and destined to melt the second you opened them. Why did they matter? Because they were fun, collectible, and full of personality, even if the face never quite looked right. You didn't care that the eyes were crooked or the smile was warped. You loved it anyway. Kids begged for them, posed with them, and always bit the gumball eyes first. While you can still find a few versions today, the glory days of these bars are mostly gone, replaced by more uniform, polished options. But that weird little face on a stick? That was pure, imperfect, unforgettable theme park magic. I hope you enjoyed this journey through forgotten theme park flavors. Which vintage snack do you miss most? Share your favorite below, and keep the nostalgia alive with every bite. Until next time.